Okay, great. Welcome to this empathy circle. So we want to get started by just introducing ourselves. Maybe I'll just start off, just a short introduction. I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. And for about 12 years, I've been working on the topic of empathy. Just came across it when I was working on some documentaries on human values and said, this is really important. So I've really dedicated my life now, the rest of my life, to exploring the topic of empathy. I've interviewed hundreds of people who are kind of experts on the topic. Most of those books back there, empathy books, that I've interviewed people about. And so that's a little bit about me, and so excited to be here for this empathy circle. So if anybody else wants to jump in, just a short intro.
Cool, I can go. So I'm Peter Lindbergh. I do a few things, but one of them is running a group in Toronto called Intellectual Explorers Club, also a podcast of the same name. And the way I look at us is we're performative agnostics. We kind of engage in ideas as if they were true without kind of accepting them as true. And two projects I've been working on is one with John Vervaeke about researching conversational modalities, and then one with Jason Snyder about this idea of mimetic mediation. So I think it's kind of nice that we're all here together to experiment with this one, because I think Empathy Circles touches on both of those projects.
Okay, I guess I'll go. So I'm Jason Snyder. My training is actually, I have a PhD in applied economics, but for a number of years I've been interested in contemplative practice, namely meditation. And more recently, I've gotten interested in mimetic mediation. I first learned about the term through Peter's article, Culture War 2.0, which I recommend to everybody. And I think one reason why I resonate with it so much is that I feel like it's an extension of my contemplative practice of, I spent many years, I think, mediating the cognitive dissonance in my own mind. And now when I attempt to mediate among, say, quote unquote, warring tribes, they also provoke dissonance in me. And so part of my contemplative practice is trying to understand them and see, where they might agree more than they disagree. So that's some of what I'm doing right now.
So I'm John Vervaeke. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in cognitive psychology and cognitive science. I also am the director of the Consciousness and Wisdom Study Lab. I do work on the nature of intelligence and sense-making, consciousness, mindfulness, and wisdom. And in connection with that, I do a series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which is about what I perceive to be a crisis of meaning that's facing Western culture. And the reason why I'm interested in this project with Peter is because I'm in the process of putting together a second series called After Socrates, which is an attempt to try and get a better understanding of the ancient practices of dialectic, both the way they were intrapersonal and interpersonal, and put that into dialogue, if you'll forgive the pun, with a lot of these modern dialogical practices, and see if we can come up with something that can better activate and exact collective intelligence into something perhaps like collective rationality, or dare I say it, collective wisdom, so that we have better resources for which to, not just theoretically, but existentially and practically help people respond to the meaning crisis. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So I wanted to give an explanation of how the empathy circle works. I'd sent out some links to how it worked, so we don't have to go into too much detail for anyone that's watching. There'll be down below, there'll be links to some video introductions on how to do an empathy circle. So I'll be giving just sort of the minimal viable kind of instructions. And there's also a handout here that has the basic instructions. So in this process that we're using is one person is going to be the speaker, and then they're going to select the person they're going to speak to, and that's going to be the active listener. And the speaker can speak about the topic that we have at hand, which is going to be what are any feelings of concern, anxiety, worry, or fear that you're dealing with in your life at the present moment. So this is going to be the topic that we have, and you can talk about anything that's alive for you. So you don't have to stay on the topic. It can be, you're free. If there's something else you feel really excited about, that you just have to get out, that's really in your awareness, you're welcome to talk about that. And so you'll select who you're going to speak to. That person is the active listener. You share some ideas, speak for an idea, share an idea or two for, a minute or so. And then you pause to give the active listener a chance to reflect back their understanding of what you have said. And the idea is for you as the speaker to be heard and understood to your satisfaction. That's the ultimate guide here, is like, yeah, you really got what it is that I'm saying. I feel like you really have it. And then you can share some more. And then, again, you'll pause, and then you'll get a reflection back. And it kind of goes like that we have time limits of 5 minutes, and I'll keep time. So I'll hold up this when the time is up. And when the time is up, you want to sort of wrap up what you're saying, in a comfortable way. And then it'll become the turn of the listener, the active listener. Then they become the speaker, and they select who they're going to speak to. And that person reflects back what they're hearing. And we go around like that for the time allotted, which is, so a little bit over an hour, almost an hour and a half. And, it's less, it's even more than that, a little bit more, hour and 45. And so, so just some tips. I'll just read those tips here. Pause often. As a speaker, pause often, so you can give the listener a chance to reflect back what they heard. If you're the listener and it's like the person is saying a lot and you're kind of losing the thread, so you can interrupt, pause, just say, could you pause so I can reflect back what it is that I'm hearing? And when you're reflecting back in your own words, so the meaning, the underlying meaning that you're getting from the other person. And you can do that by sort of summarizing, paraphrasing. You can even reflect back some of the words. You're trying to support the speaker and feeling heard to their satisfaction, and you're refraining from throwing in your own judgments, or questions, or analyzing, or putting your own stuff in there. You're just trying to be that mirror to accompany the speaker on their journey. And that's pretty much the essence of it. It's a pretty simple process. It's kind of easiest just to do it and kind of learn by doing. So I think we're ready to start. Our topic is what are feelings of concern, anxiety, or worry, or fear that you're dealing with in your life? And who would like to start? You can always speak to me to begin with, just to sort of model it. I can model the empathic listening. So if someone wants to start.
I can go, and,
okay.
and Edwin, I can choose you.
Okay.
So things that I'm worried about or concerned, I would say it's twofold. There's a sense that I'm being pulled towards something with all these sort of projects that I'm doing, and the projects originally weren't really speaking to each other, whether it be the events or the podcast or my writings. But now they're sort of speaking to each other and sort of the adjacent projects that are associated with them. And it just feels like I'm fully in it now, and I'm being pulled by something, and it's delicious. But it's also a little bit, scary is too strong of a word, but there's a sense of, am I worthy for this task at hand? And I have a sense that I am, but I won't be if I will procrastinate or engage in bad habits or things like this. So there's a sense of being worthy for this task that I'm being pulled towards, whatever it is.
Okay, let me reflect what I'm hearing. So you've had a lot of different projects that you're working on. They seem to be coming together. There's maybe sort of a momentum building, and you're feeling a little, it's like worried, a little concerned if you're worthy, if you're maybe capable of this, of what you've been called. You feel like you've been called to do this, but you really kind of have concern that you're worthy of it.
Yeah, that's like a 95% right. I would just say that I do sense I am worthy of it, but I need to be disciplined and sort of take this opportunity by the horns and not, not procrastinate and engage in the path of least resistance type of thing.
Oh, so is it more you're concerned about is that you're not going to sort of grab a hold of this and kind of do the work that's needed, and so concerned that you're going to procrastinate and not apply yourself to this.
Right. Yeah. And do I go on and saying the next?
Yeah, whatever.
Portion?
So
Yeah.
you've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah. I feel like I'm understood there. And again, the concern is like, I don't know, maybe like 15%. So it's not a huge concern. And the other concern is that I took a risk with my career. I left a job that had kind of a secure salary, even though it was a contract, to go on to work at a startup. And there's a lot of excitement in I feel congruency with the startup, but there is that kind of financial concern. And I would say it's probably 30%.
Mm-hmm. So you have sort of mixed feelings. You've left sounds like a secure job to go with a startup, and so you're having some financial concerns or worries there.
Yes, of what
the risk.
Right, of what's like, because it's a contract. So what's going to happen after the contract? The uncertainty there. But there's a deliciousness with that uncertainty too, because I'm building a relationship with uncertainty and not trying to kind of control the future and just let it see where it wants me to go.
Okay, there's a feeling of uncertainty, but you're also, in a sense, enjoying the uncertainty, or feeling a sense of deliciousness around that uncertainty because of maybe the newness of what it can bring.
Yes, in a way, I'm viewing uncertainty as an opportunity to practice my stoicism and kind of like my spiritual path.
So uncertainty can be a place to practice some of your values, like stoicism and so forth.
Yes. Yeah. I feel understood.
Is there more? You got 1 minute.
No, I think those are the two concerns.
Okay.
And then the percentages dropped after I articulated them. So it's like around 10, 20% each. So
just by sharing these, that the percentages of excitement and anxiety have kind of shifted. The percentage in your awareness is shifted.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so you feel fully heard. One way I just say I feel fully heard, and that means you're completely done. It's my turn. Next.
Yes, I feel fully heard.
Okay, I'll speak to John. So in terms of anxieties, I feel a little anxiety about this circle, because I think, here's this professor, here's all these people, who have all this experience, and I feel like if this doesn't work, I just feel some anxiety about it, doing something that can be seen as kind of different.
So you're experiencing anxiety because of the people you're talking to. One's professor, I guess me, and other people, and it sounds like the reputation of your practice is maybe on the line for you, and so you are a little bit apprehensive about how this is going to unfold.
Yeah, it's a little bit like little butterflies in this part of my body. Just, I hope this works,
So there's the butterflies, which connote anxiety, but there's also like an expression of hope. You hope it works. Yeah,
and one thing I've learned is to go into the anxiety, to go into fear. That I had this one insight of having those anxieties, and can I make them get bigger to fill my consciousness? And I've thought of, it's like it's like a picture. The anxiety is like a picture, and I would like to zoom in on the picture to see the individual pixels of that. And I think there's something really great about going into our fears, or into my fears at least. Yeah.
So you've had the insight that it's valuable to go into your fear experiences and sort of magnify their resolution so you can see them more detail, more maybe features. And you found that a very valuable thing perhaps for everybody, but for sure for you.
Yeah, and kind of fill my awareness with the butterflies. You know, there's all these butterflies, but there's something sort of magical about the butterflies too. It in a sense, it feels like, on one hand, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go into this. It's too painful. It's too scary. But then there's all this life in there too. So it's like this. It's an internal tension, stress around it. Like, I want to kind of shut down instead. So there's this push-pull kind of quality.
So you want to expand the butterflies till they fill your consciousness, and then you experience this sort of deep tension and ambivalence about that. Part of you wants to pull away from it because it's painful in some sense.
Scary.
Scary, right? Scary, but yet there's an aliveness or a magical quality too that really sort of also you find appealing.
Yeah, and I want to go into this more a little bit later, but I did want to speak to one other anxiety, is the financial aspect that Peter was talking about. Like 12, I used to work in the high tech field, making like a lot of money, just I couldn't. And then I said, I'm going to go into this work with empathy, on my own. And it's just like a financial stress. So that's just like this ongoing financial worry and stress, because it's, I can kind of get by, but it's always kind of this financial stress component to it. I have a lot of perseverance, but I just don't like this constant financial stress.
So you also want to express something similar to what Peter was experiencing. There's a financial stress, but you're pursuing this, the empathy circling. And although you're getting by, sounds like there's a kind of chronic stressor there. You're persevering, but it's nevertheless the stressor is there.
Yeah, and it affects relationships. Like my partner is like in total, you're crazy. This is, what are you doing? It's like, I want some security. Get a job.
So it affects. Oh.
No,
so
I get a stitch. It's like laughing about it.
So it affects your relationships, specifically with your partner. She sort of like, get a steady job. There's like, make our situation more stable. But there does seem to be a bit of humor associated with that.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thank you.
So I'm the speaker now, correct?
Yes.
And I'll speak to Jason. So what's happening for me right now is because of the success of the series and a bunch of other things, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now in that I'm managing everything, but it's at my limit. And I'm not sure how I'm going to maintain this pace when my sabbatical ends and I have to go back to a full-time teaching role. So that's on my mind right now.
So due to the success of your series, it's getting a lot of attention. You're getting a lot of calls for your engagement, for talks, for workshops, and you feel like you're kind of at your maybe cognitive and emotional limits, and you're kind of at the edge, and maybe you're kind of managing it, but soon the conditions are going to change. And when you go back to full-time teaching, and you don't know what's going to happen with this new kind of life you're enacting.
Yes, I feel heard. And then along with it is another concern, which interacts with the first one in a way I'm not clear about, which is I'm aware of the dangers of a kind of inflation that this success can bring. And I've seen some of my colleagues be affected by it in ways that I don't want to copy. And so that's also weighing on my mind quite a bit.
So you're worried that due to the success that you might you might get a kind of a big head, a big ego about it, and if that happens, as you've seen with some other colleagues, it can perhaps pervert or ruin the actual message that you're trying to get out.
Yes, thank you. I feel heard. And what's interesting is that both of those concerns have sort of a tension within them. Like both of them, like sort of, I should do more or I should do less. And so they sort of reverberate off each other a lot.
So you feel kind of pulled in two directions. One is you should draw back and kind of, maybe kind of take stock and observe. And on the other hand, you find that your work is so important that you just need to push ahead. You need to really, really go for it, and you find kind of a tension there. Yeah.
And then that tension, like I said, is interacting with the tension about, responding to this appropriately, not over-identifying with it, but not also becoming disinterested in it, trying to get that balance.
So part of this tension is, on the one hand, feeling fully engaged with it and fully kind of in rhythm with it, but at the same time, you don't want to identify with it as say part of you don't want to take on the identity of these ideas necessarily, because that can go back to the ego.
Right. And then what now comes up for me is I also feel, in addition, a sense of responsibility to people that I'm joining in these projects with, like Peter and other people, and also responsibility to my viewers and my listeners, because I want to live up to a certain standard that I think that they deserve. So that also weighs on me.
So you feel, given kind of attention that your work has gathered, that you have a responsibility to really help shepherd this process along, and you don't want to drop the ball, because a lot of people might be let down.
Yeah, both of those. And I actually liked the word shepherd. That articulated it better than I did. So I really feel really heard on that point. I feel fully heard now.
Okay. So now I choose. Okay. Let me choose Peter. So I guess I'll address so my concern, I guess, we're kind of going back and forth with this idea of mimetic mediation, and I guess my concern is that I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't really have the language to articulate it, but I feel like I intuitively know what I'm doing, but I feel like I might be letting you down, Peter, because I feel like for me it's a very personal process, and I'm trying to enact it, embody it, with my activities in real life and online. But I guess I might have some concern of that. That you want to build with me and others kind of a more formalized structure of it, and there's something about me that I don't know, cringes at kind of formalizing something that for me right now is just very kind of fluid and dynamic and evolving.
So your concern is surrounding this idea of mimetic mediation, and you sense there's a gap between maybe your current ability to articulate what it is versus your kind of intuitive feel of what it is. And then there's a concern of letting me down in particular, because there's this idea that I have this desire to build a coherent model towards it. And you sort of have reservations, and you cringe at the idea of having a more formalized process that can be replicated.
Yeah, I feel heard there. Yeah, I actually don't have anything else to say. I feel heard there.
I'm going to take Jason.
Okay.
Some concerns bubbled up there. So I have concerns that that I might be putting undue pressure on you or others in ways that I'm not even recognizing by what I see as sort of a desire, a youthful desire to explore this sort of attractor of mimetic mediation.
So you have this new concern bubbling up of that, because due to your kind of excitement of making things happen, that you might be kind of pushing people beyond their comfort zone, and making them do things that that they might not be ready for, or in the state they might not be. Yeah, they might not be ready for.
Mm. And there's sort of like a hyper awareness of that I carry around of kind of other people's sensitivities and concerns. So I always try to police me being too forceful with any suggestion I have. But when I heard you speak earlier, I was wondering, am I articulating in such a way where it's like a microaggression bleeding out that I'm not seeing?
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat that again? I feel like I wasn't fully present there because I was lost in another thought. So if you could repeat it again, I would appreciate that. Yeah.
So the concern was that or the thought that came to mind is that I have a hypersensitivity towards, or at least I think I do, towards other people's kind of state and comfort levels, and I always try to conduct myself in a way where they feel comfortable and heard, and there's like a relationship there. So a worry there is that maybe I'm doing something that I'm not even aware of. So it's like a micro aggression coming out where I'm putting pressure where I think I'm not.
Okay, so you feel like in general you have a pretty good maybe emotional sensitivity, but that confidence in that you're worried might actually blind you to ways that you're causing people some kind of emotional harm or microaggression, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel fully heard.
Okay.
Do I take
your
someone?
turn? No, it's Jason's turn again.
Should I respond back to Peter, or
you can select anyone you want? It's totally your choice. Who feels like the right person to speak to?
Okay.
You can speak to Socrates if you want. Right here, he's. I don't know if you understand.
Okay, maybe I'll speak to John. So I think in general, I feel like I've really kind of in the last couple of years found my power, so to speak. Like a lot of things have started really clicking for me, and I felt like much more of an embodied being that can kind of like express themselves naturally, and before that I wasn't able to, but things also seem to be speeding up a little bit for me. And I sometimes I worry that I'm also maybe getting a little bit too full of myself, or I might be being manipulated in ways that I don't understand. Perhaps even as a mimetic mediator, trying to connect with pretty divergent groups, including some groups that I really disagree with some of their values. By connecting with them and trying to get them in conversations with others, that I might be kind of being a useful idiot.
So you feel in the last couple of years, you've really come into your power. You feel much more embodied. but it feels like things are accelerating, and that's raising a concern in you that you might be getting a little too full of yourself, or on the other hand, that you might be being manipulated, especially by some of the groups with which you're interacting, who have values that you don't share with them.
Yeah, I feel heard there, and just to add, I think in general the world is speeding up very quickly in culture, with our new media environment, and there's a lot of I feel like there's a lot of forces at play that none of us really understand, that include artificial intelligence, psyop type operations, things of that nature, and I generally try not to let myself get paranoid with things, but it's always kind of in the back of my mind, especially online, like on Twitter, when people have anonymous avatars and oftentimes you don't know who you're interacting with. Or even sometimes I worry that I might be expressing an insight that might be weaponized by another, group that in a way that I wouldn't agree to.
Right. So you feel that the world in general is speeding up, especially the world of social media, and although you are, you try not to be concerned in a paranoid sense, you nevertheless feel that there's room for concern, because often you're interacting with people sort of anonymously through their avatars, and sorry, I forgot the last bit. You said quite a bit last time.
Yeah. And that I might, so I feel like, especially in the context of Twitter, which is kind of the main platform I use, there's really a lack of context when you're looking at your feed, and so I might be expressing things, and I tend to just kind of express things at the spur of the moment, and oftentimes in very metaphorical or abstract ways. And I worry that, I might be giving food to my enemies, so to speak, or to people who have agendas that I find appalling.
Right. That was right. So your concern is especially present to you when you're on Twitter, because you like to interact often very spontaneously and insightfully. But because of the format of Twitter, there's a lack of context, and therefore you may be giving food for your enemy. They can twist or pervert your words towards intents and goals you don't have.
Yeah. I feel heard. Thank you.
Are you done?
You're fully heard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fully heard.
Yeah, fully heard.
All right. I'll talk to Peter. So what's on my mind right now is more specifically, I guess, because we're in this practice, is our project, and I'm excited by it, and I'm not. Let me see. My attitude towards the complexity is one of ambivalence. I like complex projects, but this one is starting to become quite complex, and so there's a little bit of apprehension about that. I'm confident in our abilities, but nevertheless, I want to make sure we track the complexity well.
Mm-hmm. So what's on your mind right now, or what feels alive for you, is this project that you and I are engaging in, investigating these conversational modalities. And there's something with the complexity of it where you feel a concern with it because you want to track all what's happening, all what we're exploring. But I also get a sense that there's an excitement to this as well.
Mm-hmm. I feel heard. So there's the excitement there, and there's also I can feel my mind fishing around a bit, because I'm constantly trying right now. That's how I work. I'm playing to try to get the insight connections between the various things that we're experimenting with, and again, that feels very interesting, but it also feels a little bit nebulous.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm getting is that you're getting all these different insights from all these different practices you're exploring and people you may be talking to, but you haven't connected them all yet. And this itself is interesting, but it's nebulous overall.
Yes, and then that brings up a concern I have about working with you. It's something I think we need to discuss a bit more. I eventually like to bring things into a theoretical system of some kind because I'm a scientist, and I know because of your epistemic agnosticism, this might be a kind of something you might not want the closure. And so I don't want to threaten our partnership and our friendship, which I appreciate, but I nevertheless also want to treat the project properly.
Interesting. So there's like almost a foreshadowing concern that you have that your tendency as a good scientist, you want to have a kind of a tight theoretical system that this all gets housed in, and you're concerned due to my sort of epistemic agnosticism, as you worded it, that I might sort of have resistance to this.
I feel hurt, really hurt. So the one piece I want to put back into that was that I have two relationships with you, and I want to manage them, or manage is the wrong word. I want to dwell in them both very well. One is in the project, and in that I want to put on my scientist hat as much as I can. But we also have a friendship, and it may be that the scientist hat is not appropriate there. So again, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out, because our friendship is, well, although I think it's a good one and it's developing well, it still is very recent. So there's a lot of unknowns.
So there's sort of two hats when you think of the relationship that we have. Is the one, there's sort of like the scientist hat that you have, that we're doing this kind of formal research project. Then there's like a seriousness to that. And then there's a developing, budding friendship that we have as well. And there's a sense of maybe an uncertainty, I would say, to navigate these two and negotiate these two sort of aspects of our relationship.
Right. I feel fully heard.
Great. Yeah. So I'll choose Edwin.
Listening.
Yeah. So what came alive for me with that exchange I had with John was kind of like a new understanding of our relationship and how he sort of is experiencing it.
So you gained a new insight about how John is experiencing your relationship.
Mm-hmm. And there's a sense that, or there's a desire that I have to kind of disabuse him of some of the concerns he expressed about my epistemic agnosticism. And I view sort of my agnostic hat as more like a skill set that I use in certain environments in order to house all these different people, to afford them to talk to each other, but it's not something that I use to navigate reality.
Mm-hmm. So you're wanting to alleviate some of his concerns or address some of his concerns about your sort of ongoing, sort of open-ended sort of search, and that you're saying that this is not having a theory is not something you're like against. It's this open-endedness is the way that you are able to connect with a lot of different people in a lot of different contexts, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would frame it in the sense that this, what I like to call performative agnostics, being a performer, like the performative part is the key there, is just when I show up in certain environments where there's going to be lots of people with different worldviews and epistemologies or metaphysics, but having that meta frame of agnosticism helps them feel at home and comfortable with each other. But this is not something that I go to bed in. It's not my pajamas or anything like that, right? It's it's just sort of like a method acting it. It's a skill set.
So this is like a method acting skill set where when you're a group with a lot of different views, you kind of create a space that is an open space to hear all of them. It sounds like to put them at ease, in a sense, to create space for them. but it's not that it's not just the way you are all the time. There's other aspects of you too.
Right. And yeah, the way I view the group is like being the Switzerland of the culture war type of thing, right? Where like I've seen like people on the left and right seem to resonate with what I'm doing here, and I like to keep it like that. But that being said, when I'm exploring John's series, like I'm finding nothing like I disagree with so far, and there's a lot of resonance and alignment I have with where he's going with this series and what I know about After Socrates.
So you have a lot of resonance with the direction that the project is going with, that you're working with him, and a lot of alignment in what direction you're going.
Right. And I also appreciate sort of this this strange approach for me and John to communicate with each other about our relationship.
It's kind of interesting to be talking to somebody else about your relationship with John. Kind of appreciate that way of speaking to him through me, in a sense.
Yeah. I feel fully
Feel
understood.
some humor, sounds like, in it too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll speak to Jason. Yeah, I'm enjoying the conversation and what's coming up. One thing I do notice in myself that I always have this concern, not always, I have a feeling of concern that people will want to withdraw presence. You know, so when we're in a discussion like here, you know, people we got to really work and, you know, kind of chug away, or, you know, there's got to be this, you know, we're not getting anything done here because this is pretty slow. And there's this kind of draw that let's leave this space, you know? So I just that's just a feeling of that little concern came up that people will want to leave the space because they're busy or something. Yeah.
So you have a concern that that people will get impatient with the process and will want to perhaps shut down or just say, you know, perhaps it's provoking uncomfortable feelings, and the natural tendency is to turn away and to get out of this space. The space being kind of, you know, this whole bubble that we're in, you know, this environment, and people will start feeling uncomfortable or impatient, and they'll want to leave.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a withdrawal of presence. You know, growing up in my family, there was a lot of this withdrawal of presence. Like people weren't really present. And it always made me really feel anxious, you know, about having that presence there. You know, I really want to know if people are going to be listening to me. It's like, well, if you're not going to listen, I'm just going to go. You know, why bother? And I don't want to like just, you know, kind of pontificate just in a narcissistic way. It's like, I want to be able to feel that the person is there and hearing. Maybe that's why I like the empathy circle so much. Is kind of like a captured audience.
Yeah. So you're worried in particular about people withdrawing their presence, and perhaps that doesn't necessarily mean leaving physically, but their mind and their body system isn't there, isn't paying attention, isn't trying to understand what you're trying to express, and you grew up in a family that there was a lot of this kind of withdrawal of presence, and so you feel like part of the reason you created these empathy circles is because you want to create a structure that, you know, explicitly is about not withdrawing presence.
Yeah, and it's like a deep listening. Yeah,
and staying with each other.
Yeah. And so, and another thing for some reason is coming up is, you know, John's talking about a theory. I would love some theories about empathy, because what we're doing here is empathic listening and empathy, and, you know, theoretical framework for kind of what we're doing with empathy. I'd be really interested in that.
So you feel like maybe you're kind of in this process that's liminal and it's emerging, but you kind of want more of a bird's eye view of what's going on. And so, you know, being able to engage people who are good with theory to kind of give some theoretical structure to what is actually happening in this process, that you can look at from the outside.
Yeah, because I know this process works for people working through, emotional, issues. For one, it just works. And then it's also really good for conflict mediation. It's like I stake my life on it, for the mediations that I've done. So I know this is like this foundational practice that just helps people listen to each other. And when people listen to each other and hear each other deeply, it's like something happens at a deep level. And it's like things move forward, and
So you feel like you found something that really works, is really generative. It really helps people connect with each other and to mediate conflict. And you know it works, like it in your bones that it works, but you don't quite understand why or the mechanics fully.
Yeah, and I'm trying to understand why there's so much fear in this. What we're doing can be so much fear that I had talked with my family. They're conservative, evangelical, a lot of Trump supporters, about empathy for years. They just didn't get it until once a conflict started between my mother and sister-in-law, and they went at it. It was like Christmas. And I started mediating that, doing what we're doing here, listening to one, listening to the other.
Yeah.
It was so scary. It was like the fear was it felt like in the marrow of my bones. The step in with empathy into a really, heavy conflict. And it's so scary. It's a very scary process to maintain that empathic presence, in a really deep conflict.
So you feel like you grew up kind of in a culture of fear with your parents your family was evangelical Christians, and so there was a lot of fear of hell, I presume, and that kind of affects all of our lives. And so when you're with your family, maybe that fear was preventing real connection. And so there was one time when a couple of your family members, you helped mediate something, and there was a lot of perhaps resistance to it, but at the same time, maybe there was some spark of recognition with your family and you that, oh, this is something that can be really transformative, but at the same time, there's still a lot of resistance to it.
Yeah, and I want to going over my time here. It ended great. I mean, it was like it ended with connection. It ended with hugs, and it's like I named it. I said, "This is empathy," and we've been doing empathy circles ever since in my family. So it was one of those transformational, experiences that really opened the door, and I feel fully heard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me talk to you, Edwin. So when you were talking, one thing that it brought up for me is that in these kind of environments, when you talked about, people perhaps shutting down, my fear is that I won't be able to stay present because things are being provoked for me emotionally that require attention, but I can't give it. I fear that I can't. It's like trying to hold this balance of, allowing whatever got provoked there kind of in the background, and I'm aware of it, but at the same time, the core of my attention is on the other person and what they're expressing in this moment. And so I guess there is this fear that I can't kind of both process what's coming up for me and at the same time hold this space in a way that's really respectful and really connected to the other person.
So you have some fears or anxieties about staying present with someone else, and just being able to stay present with them, with what's going on for them, as well as hold where you are as well, and without perhaps losing yourself.
Yeah. I actually, the way you put that, I feel more than heard there, and I think maybe I'll riff off of that. I think that's a great fear. Is in general losing yourself in the other person, and so you lose all sense of bearing, right? Of I'm following your, you know, your kind of what you're expressing, but I have no kind of platform from which to listen because I'm totally drawn in. And so, you know, and so kind of in order to both respect myself and respect the other person, I need, it's almost like, okay, I need to be able to save what's coming up for me and where my mind's wanting to go now for later. And that's reflected in some kind of emotional energy, you know, in the body. And so I allow that to be there while I also, you know, while it also doesn't distract me from, you know, putting, you know, the core of my emotional attention and energy into the other person.
So so it's staying present with the other person, putting the core, the main part of your awareness into being present with them, but also holding sort of onto yourself as well, and not losing your identity and not sort of being swamped or overtaken kind of by their presence.
Yeah. I think I would just add, in addition to losing the identity, losing some insight that I feel like I need to meditate on. And so being able to kind of compartmentalize that in a way, to save it for later, right?
So there's concerns about losing it, so you won't have it for later, and being able to compartmentalize yourself between yourself and the other person.
I don't know if I would describe it, actually, now I think about it, as so much as a concern as it's just a challenge. Yeah, it's just, it requires a lot of, you know, I think this skill requires a lot of practice, right? And maybe going back to what I was telling Peter of getting into these more formalized practices, I said in one of our letters is that, you know, maybe one reason why I don't want to get into these formalized practices is a defense mechanism, because I am worried that I'm not going to be able to kind of maintain my own kind of, you know, process of, you know, processing.
So that's what it's one of your concerns with your work with Peter, is that you're going to lose your sense of self and your sense of being able to work through different things that are coming up for you. Yeah,
I feel fully heard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll speak to Peter. Yeah, when Jason was talking about losing that sense of identity, like shivers went down my spine. I just felt a sense of shivers.
So when Jason was talking about losing his sense of identity, you just felt shivers throughout your body, specifically your spine?
Yeah, because that's exactly the concern I think that I have too, is that loss of self somehow. It's like there's like a big black existential hole and kind of a fear of kind of falling into that space and just sort of losing sense of self and just kind of a functionality. So that does cause real fear and anxiety in me.
So this losing your sense of self, just even thinking about it, sort of like how you described it, like a big existential black hole that you can get sucked into, and that process of getting sucked into that black hole just invokes anxiety in you.
Yeah, it's almost a falling. It's kind of a falling into maybe a deep black well versus, you know, yeah. So it's has a falling kind of a feeling to it.
So there's a falling feeling to it. And I also get a sense that there's like the unknown. There's like a fear
nothing to grab
there.
a hold of. It's like, nothing to grab a hold of. It's like, help. It's scary.
Yeah. So there's like a sense of helplessness there with not being able to grab a hold of anything.
Yeah. And it's the empathic listening. I find what we're doing here is sort of like a gym. Like there's something grounding about what we're doing here. It's kind of like building this resilience that I know I've been heard by you. I've been heard by other people. That gives me some kind of a resilience to go into difficult situations. So at that family situation, it was like, you know, I was worried about dropping into this black hole with them. But having done a lot of empathy circles, I felt like I had a reservoir, sort of this empathic, grounded warmth, groundedness to kind of stay present, you know, with them without kind of shutting down or detaching.
Mhm. So by engaging in these empathy circles, the metaphor that came up for you was that it's like a gym, and it builds sort of resilience when you're in difficult situations where that black hole could occur.
Yeah, it's like sometimes my mind goes to this point where I see my orientation in the world as sort of points of empathic connection with multiple points of view. So in sort of a very chaotic, world, I know that there's these different points of view that people will empathize with me. So I don't get, if I'm criticized with one group or whatever, there's other people who have had another point of view. So I see myself sort of in these multiple points of view to sort of orientate myself in the world. And it feels safe. It feels like a way of having some, being able to be grounded and sort of safe, but also to have a sort of an openness.
Mm. So what I'm getting that there's like all these different nodes that you have this sort of empathetic relationship with, and knowing that you have those relationships and knowing that they're alive gives you a sense of security and safety.
Yeah, especially when dealing in chaotic, situations. I like when we do our mediations with the empathy tent, going with the political left and right, we start off with an empathy circle with us, with each other. So we get a bit of a grounding. We go into it, and I've had to call to somebody, say, I need an emergency empathy, and just get this little bit of an empathy bath to kind of keep me grounded. And then afterwards we do an empathy circle debrief to kind of ground. So so creating this culture of empathy just needs a lot of points of this empathic connection.
So before going out to the chaos, the cultural chaos that's out there with all the polarization with the left and right, you have to really have that muscle developed yourself. And so you engage in it before and after you're going out there in the wild. And what I got is almost a sense of, self-care and also modeling it for others.
Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Okay. So I'll choose John. So what I'm noticing about this exercise and what I like is there's like a pressure right here in my head, and then it's like the listening muscle is being really, really developed. I have to be like hyper focused on the other person's words. And the other thing I noticed is saying things that the other person hasn't said. So I'm not only listening to like the propositions being put forth or the words being put forth, but just trying to feel the felt senses behind the words, and not just speaking to the propositions, but speaking to the felt sense as well.
So you're noticing in this practice, and you're feeling it very much sort of in the third eye area, that you're feeling like there's a listening muscle that's really getting developed, exercised right now. And then and what you're noticing in connection with that is, in addition to saying back sort of the propositional content of what people are saying, you're also like almost like reading between the lines and giving back, trying to give back to them some of the felt sense of what's going on when they're talking to you.
Mm-hmm. And my sense is that if you kind of speak to the felt sense and you say a word, maybe a word that they didn't use that really just lands for them, they'll feel fully understood, even more so than you just, parrot what they said.
So your sense is that if you speak to more what they're conveying rather than just what they're saying, and it really connects with them, it lands with them, that will actually increase the sense that they've been heard and understood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what else came to mind is I engaged in similar practices as this, that kind of gamify the active listening technique, like the anti-debate. And it has the same kind of experience where that kind of the listening muscle feels like it's being developed. And I noticed that I have a greater sensitivity now to when I'm zoning out, and then kind of checking to police myself. And I think I almost have a feeling of when other people zone out more. So I have a greater sensitivity when they're not listening.
So because of all of these practices that you're doing and sort of the strengthening of your listening muscle, you feel you're developing sort of a felt sense of when you zone out. And then it also feels to you that you can turn this ability on other people and get a sense of when they're zoning out.
Yes, I feel fully heard.
So I'll talk to Edwin now. So there's been a lot coming up for me. I'm very interested in so many ideas here. I'm interested in your point about the need for theory. I'm interested in how at various times all of us seem to be evoking this standard of being present, and I want to understand better what that means, because I do a lot of work on a kind of knowing I call perspectival knowing, and this sense of presence is crucial to that. And then that for me is connecting to what Peter's saying about you're not just picking up on the propositional content, you're trying to pick up and relate back to people also what they're conveying, not what they're just explicitly saying. And so right now I'm struggling because the theoretician in me is now getting filled with all of these ideas and these connections that are directly relevant to what's going on here, and even some of the requests that people have made. But it's like staying in the listening. It's really hard.
Yeah, so it's difficult, and you're struggling because multiple things are happening to you. On one hand, there's the theoretician in you who's wanting to theorize about what's happening here. Another part is being aware of sort of the sense of presence, because that's something that's really important to you within sense of presence. And there's another component of the felt experience behind the presence with people. So you're really interested in that part. So your mind is kind of going between these different ones. It's hard to kind of like maybe focus on one, or just noticing the different energies.
Yeah, noticing all the different energies is there. And also, the way you put that was part of it too. I noticed that I feel like I keep shifting between a theoretical stance and an engaged stance, and it feels like it's possible that, and I'm interested in that because that reminds me of a Socratic practice. And so it feels like there's a way of doing that in which you can do justice to both. I'm not clear about it now, but there's a way in which the theory and the engagement can be sort of reciprocally coupled to each other or something like that. I'm getting that sense.
So you're saying that there's that theoretical and the engagement component, and you think there's a way that the two could be integrated to become in an integrated way, and it sounds like you're not quite sure what it is yet, but you see the possibility that can happen.
Very much. I see the possibility that can happen. And that's, I've seen that in, like I said, when I've taken a look at some of these other practices, and especially when I'm looking at the work of Socrates, because there's that movement between theory and theoria all throughout. And so part of what's happening right now for me is that possibility is triggering my aspiration to being more Socratic. So that's actually making me feel happy.
Feeling some happiness because it's your desire to be Socratic. Oh, Socrates has kind of dealt with this issue.
Yeah.
So it's like that's a pathway, and then you're being more Socratic, and hey, it feels good. You're feeling excited about that, being Socratic, or you feel good about it.
Yeah, I feel fully heard.
Okay, I'll speak to Jason. It's like when John was speaking, there was some ideas that came up that I wanted to address, and they're gone. It's like, where'd they go? It's like some of my mind is like totally blank, just kind of sitting with all that. Oh, I know what it is. That if you just want to reflect that back.
Yeah, you feel like all of these ideas were coming up when John was talking and you guys were interacting, but perhaps because you were kind of so trying to pay attention, now they're just not there. It's like your mind has kind of gone blank.
And then suddenly it popped in, and what came to mind in terms of the integration of those two is there's one the theoretical and one the presence or experiential. And if those two have a dialogue with each other, have an empathic dialogue with each other, and I've done that before with role playing, like with creativity and judgment. Somebody takes the role of judgment, somebody takes the role, whatever is going on for you internally, and then they have an actual empathic circle with each other. So there's three parts what John's talking about: the theoretical, the presence, and then the experiential felt experience. There's three different roles, and they can have a dialogue with each other about where they're each coming from.
So you're feeling like there could be this this process where we're present. There's ideas coming up, theoretical ideas, and there's also the felt sense, and that these can all be integrated in a very kind of synchronous loop.
Yeah, through dialogue. They can be through what I would call it imaginative empathy, that you take on the role, someone takes on the role of each of those, and then has a dialogue with the other component.
So through this kind of internal dialogue and external dialogue, there's this kind of dialogue between these three components that we've discussed, that are all kind of generative with each other, and not distracting each other.
Yeah, and my dialogue would be about fear and presence, right? It's like those two are kind of are not integrated and haven't kind of worked out a relationship. Yeah.
So your dialogue is between fear and presence, but perhaps the dialogue is not as good as you would like it to be, and so you would like it to improve this internal dialogue between fear and presence.
And I've done empathy circles with God and Satan. I had an empathy circle with role play with God and Satan. We had a 2-hour empathy circle, and they were trying to work out their issues. And I thought that's like going to the heart of good and evil, in society. And I'd really like to do more of those with, perhaps the founder of the satanic movement or whatever, the Pope or something.
Right. So God and Satan are kind of archetypes for presence and fear. And you've done this practice, a whole empathy circle, between fear and presence, but represented by God and Satan. And
it was a separate dialogue. It's just that fear and presence would be something that I would like to work on, to integrate those. And this was another example of a type of circle with, you can kind of play with these different energies.
Okay, so these are kind of two separate things where you have this dialogue between fear and presence, and you've also experimented with God and Satan, having this dialogue.
Yeah, I feel fully heard.
Okay. So maybe I'll address Peter. I'm definitely having this kind of reaction where I want to jump in. I want to break the rules of the empathy circle. I want to throw in some ideas and holding back, and so there's a part of me that's like, how can I, when I can talk, how can I package that in a way to express my ideas that I got previously, but something, I guess the idea I think we're all kind of circling around, and I think is really juicy here, is this relationship, the between these kind of three things, being present, processing any emotions that come up, and then kind of trying to theorize about what is going on, and thinking about how they can all be kind of synchronized together in a really productive way.
So there's this tendency that you have, this impulse to want to break the rules of the circle, and then there's sort of like you're trying to slip in what you want to say during your turn. So you try a sneaky approach, and something's coming up between the three things that we're all kind of circling around, is being fully present, processing our emotions, and theorizing about what is occurring, and then having a relationship between those things.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess if I can express what I'm trying to slip in now that I've announced what I'm doing, for me, it all comes down to embodiment, to feeling sensations in your body as you're both relating to somebody else and also theorizing. And you mentioned, Edwin mentioned that, he had these ideas and his mind went blank. And I kind of have, I don't know, in my experience, once you learn to trust that when you're kind of embodying these things and these ideas are connected to kind of some kind of embodiment, that when the ideas, it's okay for your mind to be blank. You can let them be blank, because when the ideas, they haven't gone anywhere, and you can trust that they're there, and if they're in your body mind system, then they will come back out at the right time.
Mm. So what I'm getting, that there's a sense of being embodied, not only when you're in relationship with someone, but being embodied when you're theorizing, when you're thinking about ideas. And when you have a situation, when your mind goes blank, you should be okay with that, or not you should be okay with that, but you can be okay with that, because if you're truly embodied, the idea would naturally return.
Yeah. I feel heard there. And I'll just add that for me, at least, I feel like I've gained more and more trust that, if I forget an idea or my mind goes blank, I've had enough times where, because I trusted that I don't need to grab onto that idea, I don't need to try and like tackle it down, I just can let it go. Then the next day, just randomly, it comes up again, maybe in a new way. And I remember, oh, that was connected to before. And so there's like this trust that I feel like can be developed that can help facilitate this process of the dialogue between these three modalities of, just letting what's going to arise and don't try and force something, don't try and force a thought if it's not there.
So what I'm getting from that is that there's a trust that you're developing, and maybe you're developing it because you're building a relationship with this experience of your mind going blank. You're having a better relationship with that. And by having this better relationship and this trust that's forming, you can have a comfort and a confidence that these thoughts will occur when they need to occur. And by having this sort of trust and relationship, a better relationship between those three things that you mentioned earlier will happen.
Yeah, I feel heard there. And one last thing, I promise. And I think that trusting that, so you're listening to somebody and ideas come up, and it's like, and they get stored, they get in kind of an embodied sense. It also frees us up to pay more attention and have greater presence with that person, because we're not in fear that we're going to lose the idea.
So by this trust of being fully embodied, when you hear an idea, you can trust will be stored somewhere, and that whole process affords us to be even more present with someone.
Yeah, I feel thoroughly heard. Thank you.
Great. So I'll take John. One thought that came up during this is that I found it interesting that, so the two projects I have with you, John, about conversational modalities, and the project I have with Jason with mimetic mediation, I had the sense that Jason felt or was concerned that I was too structured in our project, and then I was not structured enough in our project.
So a thought that came up to you is a comparison between the two projects in which Jason was expressing that he felt you were too structured, and that was making him feel ill at ease, and that I felt you were too unstructured, and that was making me feel a little ill at ease. Yes.
And I have a desire to disabuse both of you of that without even knowing if it's true or not. I think that desire comes from just wanting to maintain a relationship more than the truth value of those possibilities.
So you want to disabuse both of us of this. You're not quite sure if that's being driven by concern for truth, or even if it is true, but what's more clear to you is that you're being motivated by preserving the relationships that you have with me and with Jason.
Right. And just like thoughts occurring that like for the last like 3 or 2 years, it just felt like I've been hopping from one existential crisis to the next. And at first, this process was very like, unpleasant to say the least. But now that I'm becoming more skilled at hopping, it's almost like escape velocity has occurred, and it's like the hopping has become pleasurable.
So for the past 2 to 3 years, you feel like you've been hopping from existential crisis to existential crisis, but as your skill set is developing, you now feel like you're taking flight, and that has a kind of pleasure to it.
Yeah, and then Ken Wilber's quote comes to mind, the best theory is the one that gets you to the next. And to repurpose that, maybe the best existential crisis is the one that gets you to the next.
So you're quoting Wilbur, apparently with approval, that the best theory is the one that gets you to the next. And perhaps analogously, the best existential crisis is the one that gets you to the next.
And if this is true, this sort of hopping tendency, I wonder what that has to do with me being, am I more on the structured side or less on the structured side, or somewhere in this nebulous space?
So you're wondering about the relationship between the hopping and whether or not, and what that has to do with the nebulous space between being structured. The space between being structured and being more nebulous. So what does the hopping have to do with both the structure and the nebulous?
Because there's like a structure to the hopping, but then it's sort of there's a groundlessness about it as well. So
there's a structure to the hopping, but there's an openness, a groundlessness. Going back to your flight metaphor.
And there's a sense of like ridiculousness of using the word hopping too much in this kind of exchange.
So you're getting a sense of the ridiculousness of using the word hopping to convey these ideas.
Yes, I feel fully understood.
So I'd like to talk to Edwin again.
Listening.
So I found what you had to say about first of all, I'll do this and I'll let you respond. This way of dialoguing through other people is deeply intriguing to me.
So you're just finding it intriguing, speaking through other people to other people. So this, yeah.
Yeah. So when you were speaking and you talk about the 3 dimensions, the theory, the presence, and the dialogue itself, I was deeply intrigued, and then I was really intrigued, and I want to hear more about this. You talking about how you can sort of address that by doing this imaginative, enactive kind of dialoguing. That really, really piqued my interest.
So this role-playing the different parts, and you just really piqued your interest and got some really excitement, sense of interest and excitement.
Yeah. Very much. So I have a tremendous desire, as Jason does, to break the rules now and to start asking you questions. So I'll put that off till later, because I found it deeply provocative that not only were you talking about enacting the roles about these different dimensions of the process we're engaged in, but you invoking God and Satan was also deeply provocative for me because of my religious upbringing.
So it was just very provoking, this notion of these dialogues as well between the different parts, as well as God and Satan, because you had a religious upbringing. So this kind of resonates with something in your upbringing.
Very much, and then soon as you were feeding that back to me, as you just did, and I feel heard. That again, the Platonic associations come up, because this is something Plato regularly does, where he'll aspects of the psyche that are, what's going on intrapsychically is then projected out, happening extrapsychically. Like in the, you know, the Republic is a classic example, and there's many examples of, again, that move. And so it's coming to my mind that that's maybe a standard thing humans do, that we do this trade between like the inner dialogue, and then we externalize it and get into dialogue with what's outside of us.
So you're seeing that this taking our internal dialogue that's happening, we project it into the outside, and then it kind of gets played out outside, and it kind of ties in with what Socrates is talking about in terms of how he worked, projecting this out into the Republic and different parts of society.
So as we're talking about this, what I'm experiencing right now is an increased appreciation for this practice, because I'm seeing the way it's triggering some I don't want to call them universal, but at least some deeper patterns that I'm finding in the kinds of authentic dialogue that I'm investigating right now.
So this really resonates in terms of other dialogues that you're working on. You're seeing how this practice, you know, affects that, and you have some real appreciation for this practice now.
Yes, I feel fully heard.
Okay. Let's see, start. Let's speak to Peter. Yeah, a lot of things are coming up for me is right now. One is what Jason is, sometimes I feel some kind of a resonance with what Jason is saying about this identity, losing identity, and sort of navigating that space, because I just feel a lot of sort of resonance with that.
So returning back to Jason's thought about losing his identity, you feel a lot of resonance with that.
Yeah, and for me, it's about if I go into this, you know, this hole, going into the hole, that one of the ways out of it is just to name it. It's like, oh, hey, everybody, I'm going in this hole right now, right? I'm going into this existential hole. I feel totally lost. I don't know where I am. I'm feeling pretty anxious, pretty, you know, nervous. And just to name it, yeah, it transforms it. It gives it, it's not all encompassing of my total consciousness. So it's that empathy of naming the felt experience and constantly being able to do that there's something grounding about that. So it's something I've been trying to get better at.
When you experience these situations where you feel that sort of existential anxiety about that black hole, just the fact of naming it is an act of empathy that transforms the experience.
Self-empathy. I guess it's empathizing with myself, my own felt experience, and naming it. And then especially if I get a reflection on it from others, it's another form of grounding. So it creates a connection, right? It creates not a lostness, but a sense of inner connection and connection with others.
So self-empathy and other empathy create a sense of grounding.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a culture I'm wanting to build. So this is kind of like the idea behind this empathy circle is not just doing what we're doing, but how do we create a culture of empathy? Really, I'm about transforming all of society to make empathy a primary social value. So in the political, you know, cultural, economic, can we put empathy kind of at the core of the culture?
So it's not just sort of developing this groundingness for yourself, but you want to develop it for society as a whole by making it a core value in our culture. Yeah.
So this is the empathy circle is just one sort of a first step for that I see. It's like a simple, easily reproducible, you know, anybody can, after a couple times doing this, you can, you know, you can facilitate an empathy circle with your family, your friends, or whatever. So it's very reproducible. I'm trying to make it even more reproducible.
So it's the way you see it is just a first step, as a baby step in the right direction, and it's a reproducible process that anyone can use.
And there's all kinds of next steps. For example, the role playing, in terms of, I would call that empathic, imaginative empathy, that we can step into the role of anything. Like right now, we're kind of listening to each other, empathizing, hearing each other. there's what's sometimes called cognitive empathy. I think imaginative empathy is a better term for it. That I can imagine myself being the fear, or I can imagine myself being the presence. I can imagine myself being theory. I can imagine myself being you. I can imagine myself being anything. I can imagine myself being myself in the future, and kind of tap into the felt experiences that arise in me from that point. And then I can actually have an empathy circle with others within that, from that imaginative role.
So the first step is kind of practicing empathy circles as we're doing right now to develop this muscle. And then one of the next steps is have imaginative empathy circles, where you can have empathy circles with a variety of felt senses, a sense of yourself in the future, maybe a sense of yourself in the past, a sense of being someone else.
Yeah. So I guess I just want to make the point that this is like one little easy first step that can lead into a lot of different directions.
Mm-hmm. And so you want to make the point that this is just the first step in a good direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel fully heard. Thanks.
Right. About the time, are we going to?
I thought we were going for 2 hours.
Okay.
Is that works for
everyone?
So you've got about 20 minutes before we would break and then just do a debrief.
Sure. Okay. So I'll choose Jason. There's sort of a blankness in my mind right now, and I'm wondering if me checking in about the time was to to avoid expressing it.
So you're feeling nothing is really coming to mind. There's a blankness, and checking for the time was a way to kind of distract from having to think of something to address somebody else with.
Yes. And the sort of the tension in my head is greater now. I just feel like I'm really exercising this muscle, and just the thought that listening is a superpower in a way, because so many people are not good at it, and I have this greater desire to just be a really good listener.
So you feel this tension in your head that's associated with listening. It's a muscle, and you feel like a lot of people just don't exercise this muscle nearly enough. And so I missed the last point. Can you repeat the last point again?
And so there's a great desire for me to increase this muscle.
Okay, and
develop it.
And there's a great desire for you to increase this muscle and develop it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And overall, I feel a sense of just sort of peace and gratitude for this process and all of us being here right now.
You feel a sense of peace and gratitude for us being here and doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I feel fully understood.
Okay, maybe I'll address John. And this is kind of related to what I was saying before, where things kind of come up, and a term I use a lot that has a lot of resonance with me is cognitive dissonance. But cognitive dissonance really is kind of an emotional, physical contraction that I feel like something needs to be addressed, but I have to do something else, and it kind of just tightens me up.
So the thing you're experiencing now is what you're calling cognitive dissonance, and you're feeling it kind of like an emotional, physiological contraction. Something needs to be expressed, but you're tightened up, and that's blocking you from expressing.
And I mean, this is something that I think was the major issue that I dealt with for many years of feeling, I had a big, issue with like a guilt complex, but also going to what Edwin was talking about, I also had these like radical fear of hell and what the fundamentalist Christians were saying. And then it created a lot of this kind of cognitive dissonance in me.
So this is something you've been dealing with for years, especially around guilt. and that comes from your association with fundamentalist Christianity and fear of hell. And so that's sort of what's been going on for you.
Yeah, I mean, not just that, like many different kind of types of complexes, I guess. But all of that is to preface that the cognitive dissonance that I'm feeling now is there's a couple of things. One is the first thing I said to Peter about feeling about the mimetic mediation. I felt like I kind of just chose that as something to talk about, but I don't actually know that, you know, it's something of a concern to me. I'm kind of having fun with this interaction of me being kind of the wild, you know, just kind of like no structure and him being the structure. And so I'm feeling a little bit of guilt about that.
Could I reflect that back before it gets too much more?
Yeah.
The thing about hell and guilt was that's only part of a larger complex of cognitive dissonance. And one of the things that's coming up for you right now is the thing you said to Peter about too much structure. You're not quite sure you're fully committed to that, and you're just sort of part of you maybe just playing with that role to some degree.
Yeah, like I kind of felt when I was saying it didn't really feel very authentic, and so I felt some guilt around that. And then one other piece of dissonance, or not really dissonance, but is, so Edwin, when he talked about interpreting what I was saying is losing identity, I kind of felt like I would need to think about it more to see if that really is what I was trying to describe. But I was also happy that you know, the way that he interpreted what I was saying was useful for him. But it wasn't exactly what I was trying to express, at least not without me having to think about it some more.
Right. So the first thing you said was that about the interaction with Peter, you felt like you were not fully authentic about that, and there was some guilt around that, or at least some cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. And then there was something similar in the interaction with Edwin about he interpreted you as talking about loss of identity, and you're not sure that's what you intended, but you also liked the fact that it was sort of getting picked up and discussed.
Yeah, and if you'll indulge me, one more piece of dissonance is I do have in the back of my mind kind of, you know, Paul Bloom's critique of empathy, and that's because I haven't taken the time to think about it. It's creating a little bit of dissonance, and I'm wondering about doing these kind of empathetic process of, you know, how do we do it and not kind of lose our utilitarian logic? Because I think his argument is that, you know, if we empathize too much with like an in-group, then we might make non-utilitarian calculations that are actually worse for the world or something. And so it seems like there would have to be a way, you know, maybe the groups have to be very diverse, or we couldn't just do these with one group of people, but we would have to do it with many groups of people so it could stay consistent, or at least in relationship with a more utilitarian logic.
So a final cognitive dissonance you wanted to speak to right now was that in the back of your mind, there's Paul Bloom's critique of empathy. And part of Bloom's critique is that too much empathy there's a trade-off relationship between empathy and utilitarian logic. And if we pursue the empathy too much, we might lose some of the utilitarian logic. But nevertheless, maybe there's a way of addressing that within empathy circling by making sure that we have quite a diverse group of people or diverse sets of circles so that we get that balance.
Yeah, and you know, some kind of relationship between, so both bringing in the diversity within the groups, but also a relationship between the muscles we're building here and you know, this other mode that he's advocating for.
Right. So now you were trying to articulate not only diversity within this group as a way of addressing your concern, but also that in addition to training the empathy muscle, we might be training muscle muscles that Bloom is talking about. Yes,
I feel fully heard. Thank you.
So I'll talk to Peter. What's coming up for me right now, as Jason was saying, some very theoretically provocative things, and I wanted to engage in debate with him. So I chose you so as to not engage in debate with Jason. Also, what's going on is, a little bit about what you were saying earlier. I'm feeling like it's getting a little gappy for me. It's like I feel pressure to have something more juicy to say every time it comes around to me speaking, and then sometimes I feel kind of juiceless.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So Jason was offering a few positions that you felt were provocative, and you had the desire to debate him. So you chose me to be your listener. And adjacent to that, there's this sense of what you call gappiness, where you don't know what to say, but there's sort of like a desire to say something juicy, and then a gap with being juiceless.
Yes, exactly. And part of it, what comes to my mind right now, part of it is exactly the contrast. If I was allowed to enter into debate, I would find no problem to have a lot to say. And perhaps the sense of lacking in juice is precisely because it's like that very strong muscle that I've trained for decades is overshadowing this muscle that's trying to come to the center of this practice. So perhaps that's what's going on. I'm not sure, but it occurs to me that that might be the issue.
So there's two things. I think I got the first one. I'm not sure I got the second one. There's why this juice gap, if you will, is salient, is because that the desire to debate just came up, and then you're reflecting on that how this debate muscle has been so well developed for you. That might be the reason why you're running out of things, or it's juiceless right now in this exercise.
Right. So I'm trying to convey the sense that because the debating homunculus is sitting there biting his lip and feeling like there's so much he could talk about right now, it's making it seem like the listening muscle or the listening speaking, let me call it the empathic muscle, because it's on both sides of speaking and listening. Maybe it does have a lot to say, but it's overshadowed by this sort of domineering presence.
Because you're reining in this like hungry debate beast inside of you. It's overshadowing this empathetic skill set that you have.
Exactly. I feel fully heard.
So I'll choose Edwin.
Listening.
A few things came up when Jason and when John was talking. First, like the idea that I like called the mimetic tribes, where how people become tribal about a memeplex, and there's like a disembodied quality to it, where practices like this, they like create like an embodied tribe.
So you're seeing a difference between these different tribes that become sort of detached from their felt experience, whereas this one is bringing us into our felt experience.
Right. And I'm wondering if instead of like what I was talking to Jason in the letter, instead of an ecumenical philosophy, like a grand narrative, as Bard would call it, like maybe we could have an ecumenical practice that could be, I'll stop there, and I have something else to say.
So you're seeing sort of a way forward is, instead of having, you use the word ecumenical practice. I didn't quite understand it. There was, you instead of going one direction that you're working on, perhaps there's a different way of approaching some problem.
Yeah, so instead of like a universal philosophy that everyone has to agree upon, maybe there's like a universal practice.
I see. So instead of this philosophy that everybody buys into, it could be a universal practice that everyone does.
Right. And I wonder if it's sort of like a spiritual iPhone. And I wonder if this spiritual iPhone could be marketed to the existing mimetic tribes in such a way that they would buy into it.
So is there some way of selling this practice to the different tribes so they would kind of want to take part in it.
Right. And then to Jason's point, if each one of these different tribes that have, different epistemologies or metaphysics, if they're practicing this tool, maybe their I thou muscle will get developed in such a way that they can just naturally fall into communication with someone who has different ideas than them.
Mm-hmm. So if these different tribes had this practice, and when they were just talking with someone who was from a different tribe, that they would just naturally use this process to interact with that other tribe.
Right. And I wonder if you can kind of like smuggle in or Trojan horse this sort of universal practice in, how it would transform the ideas of the tribe.
Mm-hmm. So how do you get it into these different tribes? How do you kind of smuggle it in without them even knowing it?
And then returning to the sort of the agnostic, mimetic or meta-agnostic frame of my group, I wonder if this sort of performative agnostic tribe, if you will, or thing, could be the place where something like this gets developed.
And the mimetic tribe, is that the mediation tribe, or that you could develop it in that group, that the mimetic, is it the mediator tribe?
Let's call it the agnostic tribe.
Oh, the agnostic tribe. Oh, if you could bring this practice into the agnostic tribe, kind of develop it, and then that would be a place to, from there, to spread it to these other tribes.
And I have a desire to playfully apologize for using all these like ridiculous terms for you.
Yeah, so there's all these terms like mimetic and agnostic and all that. You're apologizing for those terminologies, which might not be real common for everybody.
I feel fully understood.
Okay, then see, I think we have time for one more. Then I'll speak to John. So in terms of feeling juice, it's like when Jason started talking about Paul Bloom, my juice level went way up.
So in terms of feeling juice, when Jason brought up Paul Bloom, your juice level went very high levels of arousal.
Because in this empathic listening process, I could be here like saying, I'm screaming and yelling, I'm really angry. And then you would reflect back, okay, Edwin, I'm hearing you're feeling really angry. Is there more? And I say, yeah, I've been abused or mistreated, and I'd share that experience, and you would reflect that back, right? And for me, that is what empathy is that being present with someone and just listening to where they are. And even feeling along, where they are, but not kind of being overwhelmed by it.
So I get a sense you're responding to Bloom, and that may be a way in which he's misunderstanding empathy. And you see empathy as like somebody is really angry, and then you reflect it back to them, and then that helps them go deeper and further along, and they get more out. And then, so you want to emphasize that there's this reflection dialogic aspect to empathy that perhaps, I'm surmising, perhaps Bloom wasn't
exactly
addressing.
Yeah, that it's going on somebody's journey with them. It's not taking their journey, telling them their journey is terrible, demeaning their journey, say, no, let's go this way, or I feel sorry about your journey, or, whatever. It's like, let's go on my journey instead. It's staying present with the other person on their journey. So I just guess I want to be clear that for me is what, and I'm kind of basing this on the Rogerian empathic listening kind of process, is a grounding of what we're calling empathy.
So you're emphasizing the Rogerian idea of empathy as going on a journey with somebody, not just sort of taking their journey, or not just sort of judging their journey, or not trying to take them onto another journey, but very much this like going on a journey with them in some. It feels like because you invoked Rogers, in some sort of facilitatory fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're being a presence, a companion. It's a companionship we're companions on each other's journey here. So it has a companionship quality to it.
So you want to bring in the fact that the empathy that you want to talk about has this companionship element, that you're accompanying each other and going with each other like friends on a journey.
Mm-hmm. And for Paul Bloom, it's if I'm in a rage and I'm going, and then I'm sharing you that. And then for Paul Bloom, empathy is if you go in a rage. It's sort of that state matching. So that is what he's calling empathy, which is very different from what I'm calling empathy, or the whole Rogerian definition of empathy. It's two very different. In fact, what he's calling empathy actually blocks what I'm calling empathy. It's actually a block to the empathy.
Right. So Bloom's notion of empathy is state matching, which I found very helpful, by the way. A state matching, and then you think that's the exact opposite of what you see. You see this resonance, this Rogerian resonance is actually the key to empathy. And the thing that Bloom is talking about, the state matching, can actually block that resonance and going on the journey together.
Yeah.
So they're very different. Very
it's like saying, let's go on my journey. I'm going on my, anger journey.
Right.
So he's like hijacking the empathic presence. I mean, what he is talking about is a hijack of, and in fact, that person is kind of in need of empathy themselves, because they need to be heard, to be kind of work through their anger.
Right. So if all I was doing was state matching you, you're basically hijacking me, and my empathy is not being addressed in any important way. Yeah.
And for 5 years, I've said, Paul, let's have a recorded dialogue about that. He will not, he will not, he will not. The very first article, I said, Paul, let's have an empathy circle. I want to empathize with your point of view. He would not do it. So I don't know, it's just very frustrating. It's humorous. It's a riot in some sense. It's so funny, but it's also very frustrating.
5 years you've been reaching out to Paul Bloom and asking him to do this practice with you. We could even do the practice about his concerns about empathy. You think, this would be good, but he has not responded at all, and you have found this simultaneously humorous and frustrating.
Yeah, so I feel fully heard, and I think we have about 12 minutes left, or we can step out of the process and just maybe go around and how was this experience? Perhaps I wish, what if, sort of, just anything that's on anyone's mind. And there's no reflection needed, just to open sharing.
I can go first then. The salient things about what I think is good about this practice is, it increases your presence, it increases your skill of listening, and a few things just unexpected that happened to me here is I felt I got to know Jason and John both better, and also the relationship between us. It feels more rich now because things got talked about that I didn't expect to be talked about. So I really appreciated that. And there's another thought, but I'll take someone else and while it comes back to me.
I have a couple of immediate thoughts. One is I really appreciated the opportunity to talk about what my cognitive dissonance was, because I feel like in many other spaces there's not an opportunity to do that. And after a certain point, I just shut down, and I just can't express myself anymore. I'm just kind of like a full sponge. So I really appreciate the room that this space allows for that. Another thing I found interesting, I think this is related to what you were saying, Peter, of when you're listening and you reflect back, you might be, not only are you kind of maybe using different words, putting a different way, but what seems kind of interesting to me, but also a little dangerous, is not just trying to reflect exactly back, but reflecting back in a way that provides a slightly kind of different angle, a point of view on what they're saying. So in a way, you're actually adding to what they're saying. But the danger of that, of course, is that then you're just using your reflective role as a way to promote your own ideas. And so it's trying to be faithful to what they were saying, but maybe presenting in a way that produces a new insight in them about what they're saying.
It feels to me like the challenge that you faced when you're trying to interpret poetry or a difficult philosophical text. You very often have to get beyond just the literal semantic content, right? If you're going to do anything that's going to be in any way helpful or elucidating for other people. to use Edwin's metaphor, to go a little bit further on the journey to make some sort of progress. But I see what you're saying there. I mean, that's exactly the same problem, right? The hermeneutic circle that you might be secretly imposing. I guess what I would, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that's a real concern. I wonder, so what I'm doing is wondering now if the fact that the other person can almost immediately intervene and say, no, you're not getting me. One thing that shocked me, well, not shocked, that's too strong. One thing that I was expecting to see that I didn't see was anybody ever saying, no, you got me wrong. I know that's just not right. Right? Like there was no challenge, right? Maybe because we were all trying, or I just wonder. But what I'm saying is, I did feel, because that was in my mind as something that could happen, and because it can happen, it seems like that's always a power that the interlocutor has. They can say, no, that what you just did, no, that's not what I was that's not what I was saying. That's my initial reaction to what you're saying.
Just a quick reaction to that. So I think that, when I described of how Edwin was interpreting what I was saying in terms of loss of identity, I think I felt a little pressure to kind of not not unpack that too much. But then I did it later, and I was appreciated for that. But I think maybe with more practice, speaking for myself, I would get better at not having to wait so long to kind of clarify myself.
I understand you better now. So the point is that people might be complicit in some way, but maybe with more practice, they'd be more willing to be more authentic and say, no, you're not reflecting back accurately. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's also a muscle to be trained.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, Jason. Thank you.
I did notice a couple of times when I was speaking to Peter, I didn't quite get the full picture of what he was saying. Then he said it again. So he articulated. So he went a little bit like, oh, he didn't quite get it. This is it. So there was that part. And before the circle, I had, checked you all out, checked your talks, listened to them. And I was like really excited because just the depth of, your thinking about these things and your exploration. I thought it would be very kind of a rich, deep experience. And I found it that way, just the kind of the quality of the exploration and sort of the potential, with your backgrounds and the potential for, taking the practice and the attitudes, further. So.
Yeah. And I kind of appreciate how, all four of us met. Like I don't think John and Jason met each other before, or Edwin before. So it's kind of nice seeing we all meeting together in this way. And something else that came alive for me, I thought, similar to our experience with circling, John, and we talked about this, is that there's like at least I feel there's a subtle sense of objective, or start talking about things.
You cut out there for a second, Peter. Could you say it again, please? Cut out for a second.
So similar to the experience with circling, there's a sense of frustration I feel because I want to break the rules. I want to maybe get objective, talk about like some theoretical idea. And so I got sort of frustrated here, like some other people, like everyone else kind of articulated. But it's kind of interesting that I got frustrated in different ways. Because, circling really just kind of allows you to get like a real kind of fine sense of your felt sense and how to articulate them, right? To map over your words with what's going on in your body. Where this one was more sort of like, I felt like just right here is like a muscle being built. And so this makes me wonder if there's like a buffet of these type of modalities that are needed, that you got to get a taste of this.
I was having a similar kind of thought. Well, that's not surprising because we're approaching this in an analogous framing, right? Yeah, that it feels like different muscle sets are being trained. So the metaphor that's coming to my mind is like Tai Chi Chuan, where you do all kinds of different moves and you're training different combinations, and you're putting them into this dynamic relationship with each other. And so, like while we were doing it, like a thought occurred to me. It's like, what if, like right in the middle of doing the empathy circling, we stopped, and then two people did the sort of, like what happens in circling, that quick resonance, to really sort of tune into each other, and sort of go on. Use Edwin's metaphor, you sort of accelerate the sense of companionship and reciprocity for a bit, and then return to the larger thing. Is there's a way to kind of move between them? That's just a thought. I have no claim to know its value or its realizability, but that was something that just occurred to me that we might want to give some more thought to.
Yeah, I like modality switching, like knowing when to do it.
Well, again, it's very similar to in the martial arts, right? Like you take a stance, you don't actually fight with your fighting stance. You're trying to get to a place where if I need to, I can go and do this, or if I need to, I can do this. And you're trying to get to that nexus place that's multi-apt for whatever transformation you need in order to stay with what's happening. And so it might be like you said, this isn't just a theoretical move. Like I'm trying to think, if we were to constellate these practices together in this way, they're like the way you were talking about, like an orthopraxy, right? There's got to be like this sort of optimal grip place where you're apt, the best place to be, so that you can move between them in a fluent manner.
I like that, and there's that term that came to mind. Like I think it's a martial art term of readiness. That state of just readiness, and having that
still as a mountain, but alert as a warrior.
Yeah, and sort of like that with that interpersonal, intersubjective martial art, right? Like that readiness there, and knowing which one the muscle to use.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Oh, sorry, Edwin, go ahead.
For the empathy circle part of it, from my experience, it's one of those sort of foundational practices. From looking at a lot of different practices. So I see this as a gateway to, processes like focusing. I don't know if you've been working with Genlin. So Genlin. So he worked with Rogers, and it was like, the next level of this is getting really into the felt experience and naming it and following the felt experience. So that's like another practice. There's a whole nonviolent communication practice that's also based on this, which is, well, behind the anger or whatever, what are the needs? There's following the feelings behind. There's the human-centered design process too, which is anything that you design, you need to understand and empathize with the needs of the users that you're designing for, or even co-designing. So it just seems to me that this empathy circle process is like a really sort of a first step that can be, if we to be moved into the culture as widely as possible. It gets the most sort of benefit, utility, I heard that somewhere, the practicality for the minimal amount of work. Because you can go right into, listening to people who are in deep grief, being present with them, and really saving them from like suicide, literally.
So it's very scalable.
Yeah, and then the mediation part too. You can mediate pretty heavy duty conflicts with this simple process.
Which is also something I found really interesting, because I've never heard circling proposed as a mediation practice. And yet we obviously, Peter, the kind of thing we're looking for is going to need that ability to mediate between positions that are held with conflict. Right. So that's something I think we also should pay attention to. I would like to understand a little bit more. So like, you basically just, what would you do? Like have two people from the opposing groups and you just do the circling with them in a group of four? Like
I've done it. Like that? With, there was a right wing after Charlottesville, there was a right wing group came to San Francisco to rally for free speech. And I mean, San Francisco was in a huge uproar. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was calling these people white supremacists and all that. I reached out to him, to the leader, a guy named Joey Gibson from Patriot Prayer, who's out of Portland area. And I said, would you do an empathy circle? He said, sure. And then it took me a couple days to kind of get someone on the left to be willing to have an empathy circle. So we did an empathy circle together for like half an hour online. And it was like the first time that kind of the different sides had talked to each other. And so it was like the beginning, and then later he came out to Berkeley at another event, and we actually sat in the empathy tent trying to have an empathy circle, and there's an article and some video about it. And then that kind of led to one of the right-wing guys, who's a guy named Kyle Chapman. He was called he was like one of the first people to fight back against Antifa in Berkeley, and he got a big reputation. And then the next day, after doing this circle with Joey there in Berkeley, we had the empathy tent set up on Sproul Plaza in UC Berkeley, and he brought this guy Kyle Chapman to the empathy tent and said, this guy needs to do an empathy circle. So we actually sat him down, had him with someone on the left, and had them actually for half an hour do an empathy circle and keep them in the process. And it just, kind of helps cut that edge, the real edge that people start connecting and all of that. So anyway, we have a lot of experience with that.
So Peter, that to me sounds like that overlaps with aspects of the anti-debate in important ways.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the anti-debate frame is sort of like seduces people who still want to win in a way, right? Because they have that adversarial frame. And I think this frame kind of would attract people who want to actually develop care and empathy and whatnot.
So there might be like a pedagogical program here in terms of an ordering of operations by which these modalities could be strung together to sort of lead people through. I like what Edwin says about how this is a very sort of foundational practice that it's a doorway to other practices.
Yeah.
And we're trying to do them with politicians too. So I've been talking to our governor, Newsom, here in California. I've mentioned it to him a couple of times, and he says, oh, I'm open to it. So we're trying to get these politicians to do empathy circles. I've been working with Extinction Rebellion about getting their leadership to do these empathy circles and actually use it. I see it as could be a demand, a political demand. Say, we demand that the politicians or CEOs do an empathy circle with us. So to use more of a nonviolent, social action to bring it in, kind of push it a bit into the society. So, but I don't want to keep us over either, because it's been 2 hours. So we do have an empathy circle, I guess, in a couple of weeks, and the topic is going to be, what is the felt experience of reason, right?
Right. So,
cool.
Yeah. So remember you did a sense-making wormhole, John, with all those people there. I'm doing one with Edwin, and then the topic is what's the felt sense of reason, which is pretty cool.
That is very cool. What time? Maybe I'll be able to watch it.
Do you have the date offhand?
The 9th at the same time as this one was.
Yes, December 9th.
So I'd love to have you take part. It would be a cafe, so a whole group. I'm going to bring some facilitators, and we'll divide into circles of 4, whoever, divide into 4, and then all the circles will be recorded and talking about this topic.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
So December the 9th, I'll have to take a look.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for taking part in this. It's been, I feel pretty good. I'm leaving on a high note. So, thank you.
What, Edwin? What are you going to do with the recording?
I'll post it to a social media. Put it on YouTube. Put it on and Facebook, and you can.
Send me the link, and then I can, like I said, I can tweet about it and share it on LinkedIn, and so people are interested in this kind of work can take a look at what we've done together.
Oh, good, great. So I look forward to maybe continuing some projects in the future around this. So.
Right.
Great. That'd be